AI and organizations. This is the big topic for today's episode. Most people are saying, hey, AI is here to make us productive. But what does productivity mean?
Hey, welcome to AI Revolution Digest, where businesses get smarter. I'm Jocelyn, and I'm going to show you how AI drives real results. And because the future is awaiting, let's dive right in.
Does it mean it's going to replace tasks? Or does it mean it's going to upskill our skills that we have? To answer this question, now let's welcome our very special guest for today, Dr. Sarah Bankins. Oh, thank you for being here. Can you tell our listeners who are you and what is it that you do?
Thanks, Jocelyn. It's good to be with you. So, as you mentioned, my name's Sarah Bankins. I'm an academic at Macquarie University in Sydney, in Australia. So, my research is looking at the way that AI technologies are impacting workers. So, that can mean the kinds of tasks they do now, how that might be changing, as well as how they might be experiencing work, working alongside these technologies.
So I'm very excited to talk with Professor today because when ChatGPT first came out, you're one of the first researchers who studied ChatGPT. How effective is it and how much does it really replace work? When you go to LinkedIn, there's a lot of fear mongers out there that claim AI is gonna replace us. And in your research, you said AI does two things. It's either it replaces certain tasks, so these are things that we tend to tell ChatGPT to do, like write me an email. And AI can be used to upskill or amplify our human skills to make work more meaningful. So my question is, in terms of your research, when organizations says we're going to deploy AI, what do they tend to focus more on and why?
And that's a great question to start with. And there's also another thing that technology can do, which is a really exciting path, which is actually create new types of work and new forms of tasks and even jobs as well. So what we're finding at the moment, what the evidence suggests is that organizations can take a focus on automation, which is what you call, Jeslyn, that replacement pathway. So, one of the things that organizations can think about, particularly if they're for-profit organizations, is how they can reduce their costs. And often one of their larger costs is employees, is their human labor. So that is one of the things that can drive the focus toward automation and how technology can replace things that humans do in order to reduce cost. And obviously that has implications for us as workers because there's also evidence that suggests, well, probably unsurprisingly, the way that we as workers like to see AI used is in collaboration with us. And there's certainly evidence that some of the best benefits that we can get from using these technologies is when we're using them alongside us, when we're working in collaboration with them. So sometimes that can mean some replacement, right? Like things like replacement and complementing us aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So we know that workers, when we ask them, how do you want these technologies to be used in your organizations? One of the things that we probably say is, well, we like it if it can help us to like automate or replace that really boring stuff, the repetitive stuff, the routine stuff that we do that takes up a lot of our time that isn't really high value. I'm sure we can think of lots of things like that, right? Like organizing meetings or, the chaos that can be our inboxes, all those sorts of things. So technology can complement us in ways that does have a little bit of replacement, like it takes on stuff we don't want to do. But what that can then do is free us up to do higher value work, ideally. So it's those sorts of pathways, I think, ideally we want to find in organizations, because when we find those pathways, it can mean we have a better experience at work. It can mean it can support better job design. It means we can, yes, be more productive. That's not the only thing we want, though. We also want to be, satisfied and experience meaning at work as well.
That's really interesting because with all this AI, most people that I've spoke to, I asked these executive leaders, hey, what is it that you're more excited about in AI? And they always focus in productivity. They never really focus more on making work more meaningful, just like what you said. And when I'm looking at jobs, I just look at what's the task I need to do and whether or not I'm capable of doing it. Nobody really asks me, how meaningful do you think this job's going to be in my life? And I don't think that's how most people think about our work, because at least in my head we tend to separate passion to work or to a job. We tend to think job is just something mundane we need to do. Habits and passion is something else we do outside of work. And you're telling me now that yes, AI is going to make you productive, but the ultimate goal is to make you meaningful or to have meaning in work. So my question is, and you also said it's not mutually exclusive. My question is, how does that plan out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess a place to start thinking about this, and you're right, we might not often think every day about, oh, how meaningful is my work? Am I getting, a sense of purpose and meaning out of my work today? I think the way that we can think about it, or the way that we discover it, is when we don't have it. So if we're working in jobs where we don't feel like there is a great deal of purpose in what we're doing, maybe we don't really understand what is the impact of what I'm doing, if we're not really having the opportunity to develop or exercise and use our skills, those are all different dimensions when they come together can help us to experience work as meaningful. And so I think it's sometimes when we don't have it, that's when we kind of know, oh, actually, that is something that's really important to me. Because in reality, most of us across most of our lives will spend a lot of our time at work. And so for things like our own health, our own well-being, our own satisfaction in life, we do know that experiencing meaning in work is important because it helps us to achieve those other outcomes, which we want to experience in our life, again, because we are at work a lot of the time. There's also evidence that workers, particularly younger workers, increasingly are looking to work in places that align with their values. So I think we are seeing more of this sense of, well, I want to work in a place where I can express myself freely, where I can be my authentic self, where I can contribute to something that I think is important. And I think, yeah, people are more readily looking for that in organizations and in the roles that they take on in organizations.
My question now would be, there's a lot of, any organization would have a mission vision saying this is what we believe in. And it's really hard as an employer for someone that works every day to truly believe that is what the company believes in, because everybody can just say this is our value. For example, how can you say your value is innovation and creativity if your in organization is very top down? And there's some cultures, surely they're just top down. That's their leadership style. Unlike the West, where leaders tend to be more cohesive or egalitarian. That's where innovation and creativity tend to bloom. So my question now is, yes, as a young person, I want to work for a company. I truly believe in its values. However, the critique would be, well, perhaps they're just virtue signaling, or they say one thing even though they don't believe in it as a way to attract or retain workers. So my question now is, how do we make people feel as if, or if I was a leader and say my value is innovation or creativity, how do I show workers that I truly value that, and then it's not just words on a mission and vision statement?
That's a great question. And I don't know if it's always an easy thing to do, but you're right, Jason, when you say, like, there is a risk, right? If organizations have if they want to attract people and they think expressing particular values might do that, but it's in an inauthentic way because it doesn't actually reflect kind of what the organization is about or how we do things there. And that's a risk, obviously, because if you're attracting people based on those things, they're probably going to find out pretty soon once they start working there that actually this is not what this place is like. So that's obviously a risk then for turnover, right? But yeah, for leaders, I mean, I think leaders have such a tough job. But yeah, one of those things is being able to articulate to the people that you're leading why we're here, why are we doing particular stuff? What am I trying to motivate you towards doing and being? So if things like being innovative, if things like being creative, taking risks, trying new things, if that's part of what is important in that place, so it's part of what underpins what's valuable and important, a really critical thing that leaders can do is just role model that stuff and create the environment where people feel comfortable to do those things. So things like a lot of organizations probably want to encourage us to do this is to take calculated risks at times, because that's what can underpin things like innovation and creativity, right? But you're not going to do that as an employee if you feel like, oh, there's going to be a bad outcome for me if I try something and I fail, right? But we know that that's how innovation works. We don't get things right all the time. Leaders role modeling that, showing others that, oh, I've tried and I've failed and it's okay, can be a really powerful thing to do. And creating environments that are, what we call psychologically safe, which means people feel comfortable to express their opinions and their views, to try and fail and all of those sorts of things, and know that they will be supported, that it's not a bad thing, that it's actually something that in a bounded way the organization is encouraging us to do, because that's something we want to see people engage in. I think role modeling and creating that environment of safety for people to try things, again, if that's the kind of values that the organization is wanting to create, that can be a really helpful way to kind of, for people to see this is how we're living the values. We're not just talking about them, this is actually how we do things around here.
It's very interesting. Like, for example, because of AI, there's more banks nowadays are claiming that they're tech focused or they're using AI, so they're more techy now. They're savvy. They're somehow innovative because they say they're techy. There's this assumption that just because you're using AI, you're already innovative and creative, and that's two words you tend to combine together with the tech industry. Like if you think about Apple or Google, they're creative and innovative, but just because I'm a bank and I use AI, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be creative, right? And I've done an interview with, it's not a bank, it's a private equity company. And they say they're tech focused and they value innovation. When I was there in the interview, I asked the interviewer, what are the skill set that you value in a top performer? He said a lot of things like resilience, hard worker. Never did they once say creativity. And that's why I ask you this question, because a lot of companies would say, this is what we believe in. But the moment I was in the interview room, it wasn't the case. So my question now is, you said it's important for leaders to have organizational safety, the ability for people to give feedback. And I would say this is more important with AI because we can only train AI if we give feedback to it. So we all, as a human person, that's why we have performance reviews or a peer review because you need to give me feedback, what I'm doing well and what I'm doing wrong. So my question is, what are the factors that are most important, because they have the most impact in having a psychologically safe environment for employees to speak out? And I guess another question for that is, aside from the employees, from the leader's point of view as well, because I would say traditionally we have this belief that the leader is a strong man of the organization, or you cannot, it's not that, perhaps for some cultures, it's not acceptable for a leader to show some sort of weakness or perceived weakness. So my question is, how do we create an environment for both the employees and the leaders?
Yeah, there's lots of interesting parts to that question. So maybe I'll answer the second part first about the leader. Because when you said, Jeslyn, I thought it was really interesting, that there can be leaders might feel uncomfortable showing things. I would probably call it vulnerability, right? Like the fact that you don't have all the answers or that, you're not perfect. But actually, I think that's one of the strengths that leaders can exhibit is when they exhibit that vulnerability to show other people, I don't know everything because none of us do. So it's things like that which I think can humanize leaders, because sometimes even just being in roles with big titles, leadership titles, and being in senior roles it can feel like there's a distance. People can feel like there's a distance from people in those kinds of hierarchically senior roles. So being willing to show that vulnerability, being willing to ask questions yourself, being willing to listen to other people, because if we don't have all the answers, which none of us do, talking to other people and working together is probably how we're going to get to better answers and better responses to the challenges and the questions that we have, right? So I think for leaders to do that, I think is a really powerful thing and can help to create, what we were talking about, that kind of safe, that psychologically safe kind of environment. The first part of your question, and it was interesting because I liked when you said, just, it was almost like we want to give AI a performance review, maybe. How can we give AI a performance review? And I think there's a few things that can help here, right? One is what we might call AI literacy. So sometimes it can be challenging for us to keep up to date and feel like we know enough about these technologies, because they can always feel like they're moving and there's a new version and there's a new iteration and there's a new platform. And it's like, how do I keep up with this? So I think helping to get people to a level of comfort and confidence in understanding these systems broadly, like not the minutiae of how they work, because we could spend all our lives trying to do that right, but just a general understanding of how they work, what they're based on, the kind of data that they use, their benefits and also their limitations.
Mhm.
And I say limitations because we know these systems aren't perfect. We know people worry about that. It's just one of the things that can cause people to mistrust these systems, because they can worry rightly about things like their accuracy, and the type of output that they're giving us. So understanding benefits and limitations and a general understanding of how AI operates, I think is really helpful, because then that's what helps us to then evaluate actually how is it working. But it also helps to give us confidence in our own abilities,
Mhm.
because I think sometimes we can look at these technologies technologies and think, oh my gosh, that's really impressive. That can do really cool things that maybe I can't do that quite so well. And it can drive a bit of a fear and a bit of a feeling of threat, I think, of how these technologies might impact us at work. So if we understand their benefits and their limitations, that's important. And then also continue to have confidence in our own abilities, because like I was saying before, often the best point of connection where we're probably going to get some really good outcomes when we use these technologies at work is when we're using them together. So when we're using humans and AIs together in some way. And so that means we have to have confidence in our abilities, in our judgments, in our abilities to think critically, in our abilities to know when it's telling us something ridiculous, in our ability to know how to contextualize what it's telling us, because it's like, that's not going to work in this context. I know that. So how am I going to adapt to it? And so when we kind of have those things in the mix, I think we can start to have confidence in giving feedback in our organizations on how these systems are working. And that's super important, because deployment isn't like a one-time thing. When we deploy these kind of systems, we want to keep evaluating them over time to make sure they're working how we want them to work, to make sure they're actually doing what we want them to do, to make sure they're actually helping people, not hindering people, that people are adopting them where it makes sense, not that they're kind of having to work around them and create more work for themselves. So I think all those things together can help to create that environment where we use AI, but we use it well, and we know that we are still really super important in workplaces too.
That's very interesting when you said that. What I'm hearing is upskilling, where AI is gonna help us upskill the things we already know, and as long as we know where AI's weaknesses are, it's not gonna replace us. And one of the weaknesses is critical thinking, just like what you said. Factually, what this AI spitted out was correct, but it might not be applicable to the context we have in our business, in our industry. So this is where critical thinking, this is where experience would come into play that AI would never just know, or they might know, but they don't have the intuition to know, yeah, this is the right data for this context. Now, my question now would be, that's easier for managers that have this job experience because they know, okay, at this problem, I know the right data to deliver. As someone who's new, who doesn't have that much of an experience yet, I tend to have a lot of data overload. Where there's a problem before AI was we didn't have that much data. It's hard to get information. It was the same with the internet, right? Before the internet, we need to go to the library. Now with internet and with ChatGPT, there's so much information, but is it the right information that I need for this context? Is it even correct information? And that takes a lot of critical thinking. So my question now would be, one of the best ways to show critical thinking is the ability to write prose. Because the moment you know how to write, you can edit, you can audit. Now, as a student, I'm doing a thesis now. And most of my peers need to write a thesis to graduate. We're using AI, and unfortunately, I know some people where they're making AI write the whole thing. So some people claim that AI is cutting our ability to write, our writing skills, and therefore it's cutting our ability to think critically about the words that we use. So my question now would be, it's hard to balance these two because as a human, our bias is always to conserve energy. I think that's how our brain works. I think there's a research where 90% we're on autopilot. It's our 10% is what our brain conserves for those very heavy tasks. And when we overestimate the benefits of AI, thinking it can write all of my research paper, then I'm just gonna let AI deal with my research paper. So my question now is, I'm not saying writing is not important. It is important, but some people are just not inclined to do so. They just don't feel as if it's a skill set they want to keep developing. And it's like what you said, with all these new technologies, these new iterations, they always say, hey, why should I upskill if a new technology can come in and make my skill obsolete? So that's the general framework. My question now would be, what's your response to that?
Yeah, that's a super big question that I think lots of, not just organizations, but educational institutions as well are thinking about, Jaslyn. It's a really important one. So if we think about writing, right, sure, it can be easy for us to think about, it's sentences and words on a page. kind of thing, right? Then we can go a level deeper, I think, to go, well, what else does writing do? So it's one of those things that actually helps us to organize our thoughts. So, and there's lots of things that go into writing something well. And you touched on some of them in your question, right? So when you talked about information overload, like one of the things that we often do when we're trying to write something, whether it's a thesis or something else, is we're usually drawing on other bits of information. So if we have an aim with our writing, we generally have to be able to find what are the relevant sources that I want to draw on, what are the bits of information or data that are going to be important to help me write this thing, whatever the purpose of it is. And that's a skill in itself, right? Knowing where do I get my evidence from? How do I verify that evidence? How do I know that it's quality? And we know this is one of the established problems still with things like generative AIs like ChatGPT, is that it can still do this thing we call hallucinate, which is it can make up things which look plausible, but they're just not true. And it can also hallucinate things like evidence or references. So it can make up sources which again sound plausible, but don't actually exist. So for us, one of those skills is still how do we find quality, reliable, relevant information or data to help underpin our writing? And then how do we synthesize all of that and pull it all together in a way that's coherent, that's going to fit the purpose of what the thing is that I'm trying to write? And so this is where that whole, how do I organize my thoughts in a structured way? How do I get my thinking together? What point am I trying to make, or points am I trying to make? And how am I going to make them in a compelling way while I'm bringing in evidence to support those things? And then how do I write it in a way that matches what my audience needs, that's coherent and consistent, and all of those sorts of things? So we know that actually, these things like ChatGPT can do, some of that stuff pretty well, right? Again, it's got limitations, but it can do some of that stuff pretty well. But if we don't know how to do that, we are missing out on important skills. So, when we say things like critical thinking is important, a lot of the stuff that I was talking about there help us to develop our critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So even though a technology can shortcut it for us and we can put in a prompt and it can give us something like that looks pretty good, it means we're not developing all those skills that I was talking about that go into when we're writing a certain thing for a certain purpose, for a certain audience. And so I think we think those skills are still important. And I think organizations still think those skills are important, right? Because there is evidence, sort of emerging evidence for when entry-level workers are coming in, like in white-collar kind of roles, and they're using these technologies, managers can have a concern that they don't really know necessarily how much of what you're giving me is what you know. Like, how deeply do you know this thing that you're handing to me? Do I know that you've done that, or is this completely an AI? And so there is a worry there that the depth of knowledge, the depth of skills that historically have underpinned creating something like a long form piece of writing might start to degrade a bit if we over-rely, if we over-depend on these technologies that can now do this, pretty well for us. So I hope that
Yes,
answers your
agree
question.
that. Now my question now is, I'm doing job interviews because I'm looking for an internship for next year. Don't get long. Now my question now is, said we need to be more of a critical thinker. We need to know how to ask the right questions. When I'm doing job interviews, when I was in the US, it's very different. The interviewer encouraged me to ask questions. Like, for example, they'll ask me, how do I evaluate a business? They encourage me to ask, what industry are we looking at? What stage of growth is the company in? Why are we evaluating the company? Are they selling? Are they like what's the purpose of the question? But when I do some interviews, let's say in the Philippines and in Singapore, experience in the interview is if you the interviewer would have a list of questions. And that's it. And for me, when I ask questions, I can really see in their face they get annoyed. Why can you just not answer the question I'm giving you? So in terms of AI, you said there's difference, right? Is it gonna make our task or upskill ourselves? And what I see is, at least in the West, when you're doing interview questions, of course you want someone that's technically skilled, but you're looking at certain characteristics such as resilience, resourcefulness, creativity, and that's where behavioral questions come in. In Asia, what I'm seeing is you're looking for people that are just trained. The moment I go and join an organization, you can just do the job. That's an assumption that school should train you. So for example, Singapore's continuous learning. They're always training and developing their students. And that's why they're one of the best educational systems And Singapore is highly developed, and yet they're not that innovative as a country compared to the US because of this cultural difference of I'm just encouraged to ask questions. And I've seen that in a job interview. Sometimes I ask people, well, what do you mean by that? And they froze. They froze because I'm asking them things that's out of the script. So my question now would be, because I'm going to do an internship in Asia, of course. So my question is, when we're looking for talent, now with AI, it can give you the best technical skills out there. How do we evaluate candidates that they really know what they're talking about? Or does it even really, because AI can explain things to you, but they cannot understand things for you. So my question now is, traditionally, what we're testing on is textbook questions, things that an AI can do. But if you're an introvert and you want to look for understanding and not just ability to explain, how do we test that in my potential candidates?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And congratulations on your internship too, Jeslyn. That's fantastic. And it's interesting to hear your experiences of different kind of selection processes. So I guess what AI can invite when organizations are seeking talent, particularly early career talent, is how can we be innovative in how we're sourcing individuals and actually how we're talking to them when we get them into an interview situation or something like that. So sometimes what that can be is not just one-on-one interviews. Sometimes that can be, group-based interviews or group-based activities. Sometimes it can be trying to put people into kind of the situations that they might experience at work, right? And then you're starting to see, okay, how do you deal actually with these questions or with this client or with this problem? Or how would you deal with this, not just on your own, but how would you engage with a group, with your team when you're having to deal with a question or a problem or a client or whatever? Asking those kind of open-ended questions, putting people into kind of authentic work experiences. I think that's where, and perhaps without the aid of the technology as well, can be interesting just to see how people communicate with others, because it's, to get to particular outcomes, because I think that's always has been and always I think will be those really critical skills that I think particularly for early career individuals, organizations want to see, like how well can you communicate with other people, a diversity of other people? How well do you present yourself? How do you even start to do things like in a team? How do you create an environment where people start to bring the best out in themselves? That's really important as well, because that's also about how are you going to help to build our culture in this organization too? So, it's all of those sorts of things that AI can't necessarily help us with, but it's the kind of things that I think organizations want to try and see when they're interviewing candidates, because it's kind of a two-way street, right? Like as a candidate, you're wanting to get a sense of what could it be like to work here? What are these people like? And they're obviously trying to get a sense, the employer's trying to get a sense of how would this individual operate in this organization? Are they going to be the kind of people that are asking really good questions? Are they going to be proactive? Are they going to take the initiative? Are they going to work well with the team? Or can we put them in front of a client or a stakeholder and we know that they can confidently present themselves and the company and represent the company and that kind of thing? So I think that's a long way around to say, I think it's tools like AI and trying to actually understand what people, who people are without relying on those technologies for certain things. It invites thinking about maybe broader and more innovative ways to do selection processes beyond things like, just standard interview questions, which can tell you something, but there's probably a lot more you can get out of people when you try some different ways and different techniques.
So I'm doing all these assessments, and some companies they give me multiple assessments, and it's one of those questions where, hey, among this, I'll give you 5 pictures and give me the next possible pattern. Or they'll give me a scenario and I need to rank which one I'm most likely or least likely to do. And most of these companies, they just use the same HR package. And I need to go through 3 rounds before I see a human person. I think personally I get fatigued because, looking at pictures and saying, wait, what's the difference between this A to B? I was like, what does it got to do with my job, right? So you're saying, yes, there are some things we want to look at, such as that's why we want us to do group interviews to see how not only how we work on ourselves, but how we also deal with other people. But we need to balance that as well. It's like you're a researcher and you understand where if you ask someone or a participant too much questions, we get survey fatigue. And as a someone on the other side of the table, yes, I want to answer your questions because I'm hoping I'll go through the next round. But if it's too much for me, I'll get that fatigue. And sometimes I even drop out because I'm just bored. Or they ask me things that I don't understand how it relates to my job. Where sometimes I feel as if it's just a standard thing to do in HR. Like those patterns of, hey, just look at these pictures, tell me the differences between these two. Or what if someone's colorblind? Like, or I don't understand what, like, spatial reasoning. Those are the skill set some are looking for when they're asking me what's the differences between these two images. But I don't understand what this has got to do with my job. And somehow HR is just asking all these questions, or they ask me what's my personality type, and I need to sit down for 30 minutes to say, am I introvert or extrovert? So my question now is, yes, we want HR, I would want to believe they want to see me as a person as a whole, and that's why they give me all this assessments. However, as a candidate, I just want to get a job. And for you to tell me, do I get a job as quickly as possible? That's what I want. So how do we balance the two?
Yeah, I think balance is a really important word there, actually, Jeslyn. And it's funny, as you were kind of describing that, it took me back many decades when I was applying for graduate jobs, to be honest. And I remember doing some of those kinds of things. And to be honest, I do not think I was very good at them. And I probably felt similarly to you. I'm like, I don't know how this is, what is this telling you? And why am I doing so many tests, I guess? So I think it's about finding balance. So I think organizations, it's helpful for them to think very clearly about in our selection processes, let's say for graduates or for early career individuals, what are we actually trying to find out about these individuals? And what do we actually want to know? What skills do we want them to have? And how can we start to try and get a window into whether the individuals that we're interviewing have those skills? So the balance part comes in, not, like you're saying, not overloading or overwhelming candidates with really extensive assessment processes, because like you say, that can be fatiguing. And it also sends a signal to candidates, right, about, where is the focus for this company? And it can also raise questions like you're asking of, why am I doing this? What's the point? It's jumping through lots of hoops, and you still don't quite know, am I even competitive to get this job? So I think it can be a matter of finding that balance of trying to streamline, using activities that are actually going to help organizations get that window into the people that they think they might be employing. And also thinking about the candidate too, right? Like, what is going to be helpful for the candidate to get a window into the organization as well? Because like we were kind of talking about before, recruitment and selection, it is a two-way street, right? Or ideally it should be. It's a way for both the organization to get a window into candidates, but for candidates to get a window into the organization. And generally organizations want to be positioning them in a good light, because if they're interviewing people, they're interviewing the people they know. These are probably going to be the individuals that we want to recruit for. So I think it's finding that balance and giving candidates an opportunity to give the best of themselves. So also thinking about ways that what are the best selection tools we can use that help candidates express themselves in the best light and show the best of themselves without feeling overwhelmed, without feeling fatigued and over surveyed and over tested and all of that sort of thing. So I think that word of balance, finding that balance, is really important.
So that's that's very interesting where people say, hey, we want balance. And I was thinking, why is it all these organizations, they just ask this test? Because it seems to me they're just asking it for the sake of asking. Or I don't really understand what does this got to do with my job. And I went, so like any teenager, I went to Reddit and asked this question. And Reddit said, hey, actually, some organizations do this on purpose. They purposely try to fatigue you to see how much you truly want this job. And my question now is, hey, for the recruitment process, this is what you're showing me. You're just giving me tasks for the sake of it, to prove something that I'm resilient or hardworking, because I'm willing to take those mundane tasks even though I don't fully understand. And when I go to the job, somehow I already preempt that this is what the organization values. So I just chug through fast, even though I don't truly understand the meaning behind it. And it's difficult, right? It takes certain types of reflection to know what task I'm looking at. and how much of a value it gives to the organization as a whole. So my question now would be, as an employee, how do we, of course, I want to believe that my work has value to the company, but we both know that not all industries or not all businesses value skill sets the same way. So, for example, if I'm interested in HR, my value would be most valuable in a company that deals with HR centers or does the recruitment and talent. And perhaps my skill set of human development will be less important in, let's say, a tech company. Perhaps what drives the value to those companies is different. So, as a job seeker, how do I know? Let's say, for example, a lot of my classmates want to be in finance. So they're very good in technical skills. And every company has a finance department, but not all companies value the skill set the same way. So as a job seeker, my question is, how do we see or decide which companies values this skill set the most? And as an organization, my question is, how do we identify which among those skill set drives the most value to our organization?
Yeah. I think a big part there is organizations being transparent about the skills that they want and the skills that are important to them. I don't think it should be a case where candidates are having to guess whether this is a good company for them or whether, this is a company that's going to value their skill sets or this is a company that won't. So, and again, I think, that's part of the recruitment and selection process is that window into a candidate and is a window into an organization. So I think, and ideally people want to be finding and organizations want to be encouraging people to find, that person job fit, right? Because we know when people feel like they find a fit with their job and their role, they generally perform better, they're generally more satisfied in their job and all, they're more likely to stay and all of those sorts of things. So there's value for organizations, also in terms of a return on investment. There's value for organizations in being transparent about what they're looking for in candidates, in helping people see what's it going to be like to work here. And that includes what kind of skills do you need and what kind of skills are you going to be able to develop and exercise and use in this organization? Because it's only then really that both employer and candidate are going to be able to get a better sense of what is there a person job fit here? And we want a person job fit. That's a good thing. We want to kind of avoid a misfit because it generally doesn't end with a person staying in a job for very long or feeling very happy in a job or feeling very productive in a job. So I think the more of that transparency, the more that window is clear for a candidate and for an organization both ways. Hopefully that helps to answer those questions of what does this company actually want? What do they want from me? What are they looking for?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm very fortunate that I'm in a program that allows me to work and study in different countries. So I was in US, Germany. Now I'm in Brazil and Singapore as well. And I'm very fortunate to see the differences in the cultural difference. I would say recruiting is very cultural. Just like what I said that in the West, the way you ask questions is different from Asia. Asia just says, hey, I'm going to give you a test to see how well you can do an Excel exam. And that's it. It's just a very exam based, and there's less of a dialogue between the interviewer and interviewee. When I'm there in those interviewers, I felt like I was in exam. The interviewer is the exam. He's like a teacher. Like, I'm going to ask you all these technical questions, and that's it. It's an exam. And I think as banks, they just give exams. If they can give exams to 1,000 candidates, they'll just get 30. Even before speaking to someone. That was the difference I experienced. Like in the US, what often happens is we do the person to person interview first. After organizational fit, just like what you said, and behavioral fit, that's when we look at skill set. Hey, can you do an Excel exam? Can you do this coding exam, perhaps? And it's just the reverse, interestingly. They make you do this exams first before I even see the person. Seeing the person is the last stage of the selection process. So my question is, we keep talking about, yes, we want to see cultural fit, but we also want you to see whether or not you can do the job right. Some cultures do their selection process differently. It has a huge impact on me as well. So my question is, let's say you're interviewing an Asian. Majority of countries are very exam based. You can just look at their their educational system. At a very young age, we always need to have this high test scores to get on the next stage. Unlike in the West, we can get a gap year. If I tell my parents I want to get a gap year, they're gonna explode. They'll say, "What? That's ridiculous." Sorry about that. My internet was cut off, so I need to go to my phone. So just like what I'm saying, there's a huge cultural difference when we think about work. That's what my point is. We're in the West, we're looking more about the characteristics of a person. Are they resilient? Are they resourceful? Can they do critical thinking skills? And once we deem that, that's when we see to what extent. And that's why we have the person first, and then we do the exam. And countries like Asia is the reverse. They'll say, "Hey, can you do skill set first?" And then we want to see how are you like as a person. So my question now is: different cultures value different. They just value tasks different. And my question now is, if I were to go to their company, so let's say their headquarters is in their state, they also operate in Singapore or in the Philippines. When I look at this organization page, they're gonna give all their value, all of the job description is gonna show you the skill set. But my question now is, how do I show what do firms read knowing their headquarters in the West, but they operate in Asia as well? In terms of organization culture, how does it even look like? Do I follow the culture headquarters, or do I just follow the culture of where I'm going to go? Or does it mean that organization, just because they're multi they're a multi company, they don't really have one culture. They have separate culture based on the operate. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jaslyn. I wish I was an expert on cultural differences in recruitment. I think it's really interesting. Look, I think part of what can help you understand that as an individual and as a candidate is hopefully that when you're in an interview situation, you're able to ask questions of the people in that organization who are interviewing you. And hopefully you would, and I suspect they would be receptive to helping you understand what what that culture is like, what that place is like that you're aiming to work in. And sometimes what organizations can do in recruitment process or selection processes is, and again, it's giving that window into the organization, let candidates into that company, is like let you go and meet people that you might be working, is let you go and walk around a physical place where you might be working if that's possible. But even just having the opportunity to meet with managers, senior managers, potential team members gives you an insight into the culture of a place. So I guess ideally candidates that when they're going through that selection process, the company is creating that environment where you can ask those sorts of questions, and that's probably the best way while you're still kind of an outsider to the place. You're not an insider yet, but that can often be the best way to get those kind of insights, is just being comfortable to ask questions, and the company and the people representing it are willing and happy to answer them for you.
What you said was very interesting because what I'm interviewing is a multinational firm. And one of the biggest values they claim was innovation, creativity. So, of course, in my head, like, okay, they want people to ask questions. There's no way you can be innovative if if you don't ask questions. It's only by asking questions that you know what are the things you don't know and therefore improve on. So when I asked this in the interviewer, when I was asking questions, he was just annoyed. But if I ask him, hey, what are the values you're looking at? We're looking for someone who can ask questions and intuitive. I was like, so I totally agree when you said this is a two-way street. As a candidate, we can see this is what the company claims. People can just parrot what the organization claims their values are. But in an interview, you can just see it with those body language on how they respond to certain things. So my question now is, when we look at upskilling, we often value or focus a lot on the employees. How can we upskill our employees to, just like what said, have AI literacy? But we don't often talk about leadership. What are skill set that leadership needs right now with AI? And we know that AI is challenging organizational culture because it changes the way we do work. And that's a lot of your research. So my question is, with all of your research with AI and how it helps us work with humans and upskill us, how can AI upskill leaders and making them better leaders? So my question is, what makes a good leader today, and in what ways can AI help them get there?
Yeah, that's a big question. So I think leaders have to upskill just the same as everyone else, right? Like, I mean, if we, when we're introduced to anything new, whether it's technologies or other things, we all have to learn, right? Like we all have to figure out how to use these things and where's the best way to use them. And arguably for leaders, because they're often the ones that are tasked with making the decisions about, well, if we think about technology, what technology might we use? What technology makes sense for us here? What technology could help us do our work better? They kind of have more of an imperative to understand these technologies well, because they're having to make those kinds of decisions. So I think that upskilling part and that reskilling part is relevant to all of us in organizations, no matter what level we are as places. I think for leaders, sometimes I read stuff about, technology can automate leadership and, all of these sorts of things. For me, I inherently think leadership is about relationships. It's relational. So I think a big thing for leaders is just to remember that, is not to, again, like the rest of us, is not to feel threat from these technologies, is to think about how can these technologies actually help me? How can they do some things to help me do my job better? And remember that so much of leadership is about how you relate to people. It's how you interact. It's how you motivate people. It's how you create, those things we were talking about before, right, Jaslyn? Like that's psychologically safe environment. How do you create an environment for people to be innovative and creative, which, organizations always want us to be be doing those things. That's about your interaction with people. It's about your conversations with people. It's about how you engage with the people that you're leading. And that, I don't see AI being something that is suddenly going to automate. That's about a human connection and a human contact. So I think remembering that those aspects of leadership are still really important is critical for leaders, because I think it will remind us why those roles are so important, and the fact that technology can help maybe some parts of that, but there's always going to be that human to human connection part of leadership that is really important.
I guess you're saying is very important, that yes, in work we go 9 to 5, we're gonna sit down, do our task, but we don't just go to work for the sake of work. And when we join a company, we don't just join an institution, we're joining a company of people, right? That's the reason why we're saying for an interview is due diligence for both sides. Do I see myself working with you? And do I see myself working in this organization as a whole? So what you said was very important, where when we talk about work, it's not just a task. It's about the people that we're working in. And that's the reason why this is what makes work meaningful. This is where leadership comes in. When, especially now with all these new technologies, how do we give confidence to our employees that, hey, this is something new. We've never seen this before. We may not know to what extent this is going to impact our organization, impact you. But as your leader, I'm going to take that responsibility and help us all get there. And that is the ability to persuade, the ability to make people have the psychological safety. It's not an emphasis in organizations. I would say when we often get there, there's this belief that, hey, I gave you this job, you better be thankful for it. There's this bias that companies, they don't value this as much as they should. But what you're saying now is with AI, this is a skill set. We need this more than ever. And as a leader, you need to have a certain level of self-reflection to get there. So thank you so much, Professor, for sharing your insights. So before we leave, is gonna play a 1 minute game. It's just a game that we play with kids. It's an or question, such as, would you rather do this or that? So we're gonna play this for 1 minute. Just give me what you prefer the most, and when you're ready, we're gonna start the timer.
Okay, I'm ready, Jaslyn. I'm ready for your minute of questions.
Okay, first question, would you rather text or call someone?
Oh my gosh, that is so funny, because I was talking to a colleague about this just the other day. She prefers to call and speak to someone, and I said I just prefer to text.
We're both introverts, so I would rather text than call and hear their voice. So question, would you rather live in the city or province?
So for me, like here, I think that means like more in a non-city place, right? I grew up in a non-big city, so that feels like home. Yeah.
Grew up in the suburbs or were you in a city?
I
Are you a city girl?
not in a no, I'm not a city girl. I didn't grow up in a big city, so I think I'm biased towards. I grew up in a really beautiful place that was like a beachside coastal place that wasn't very big. So that I think that's my natural comfort zone.
I'd say I would rather live there. I don't know anyone that would want to live in a concrete world like the city for long. So my question
But
is, would you rather,
cities are exciting. I will say cities are exciting. They can be really super interesting as well. Yeah.
maybe it's just my bias because most of us go to the city for work. So we're always
True.
in this mindset and we don't really relax. So that's why I would prefer the
Yeah.
province. But it depends on what people want. Some are adrenaline junkies. So would you rather have a long drive or a long walk?
Probably a long walk because then you're in nature more, I think. Yeah.
I don't know if I can't drive. I don't have a license, but I love cake karting. I just love the race, the thrill of the race. Would you rather have money or power?
Money? Yeah. I don't know if I super crave either of those things. Because I think I don't know. I'm neutral on that question.
You gotta pick. This is the last. This is the last. Okay, I'm gonna make this the last question for both of
But
us.
you made the last question the hardest one, Jason. I think okay, money or power. I think power sounds like a really scary kind of word, to be honest. I'd rather say if we can call it influence and good positive influence in the world. I would like to have that.
I think that's power. Yeah, I know. Like, because some people in an organization they might not have the title of a boss, but they influence a lot of people.
Exactly. That's a really good point. You can have influence in any part of the organization, no matter where you are. Yeah, which is important to remember, I think.
So thank you, Prof, for being here. So before we go, what are your projects you're working on? Where can people reach out to you? Is there something you want to share with us?
Yeah, thanks, Jocelyn, for the opportunity to share something. So I guess my current work at the moment is working with colleagues here at Macquarie University. We're looking at the ways that generative AI is impacting creative workers in creative sectors. So, people that might be authors or create images or create music or any of those sorts of things, because we know that those workers are particularly being impacted by generative AI technologies. So if anyone's interested in learning more about that, to me, about any of the research that I do in this area or around AI and work generally, they're welcome to contact me. If you Google me, you'll find my Macquarie University profile in my email.
Thank you, Prof. I think it's very interesting. There's some bands that are just AI generated and they have a lot of followers. And
I know, it's crazy. Yeah.
one of the songs that are it's trending now is a Portuguese song in Brazil. It's from Brazil. When I was listening to this song, I thought it was an 80s song, 80s funk song. And I was so shocked that people are saying, oh, this is AI generated. I was like, there's no way. There's no way this is AI generated. I think your research is very interesting to know. Yes, it's AI generated. It didn't come out of nowhere. You still need someone that understands music theory, that understands how all these instruments work together to create harmony. But on the flip side, there's people that are very against it. I remember a few years back, I think there was this huge rally in the US with the Hollywood writers because they're saying that AI is getting their job. So how to balance the two and how to convince people how to balance the two, I think it's the hardest part. And I wish you all the best for your research. And I'm very excited to see where that's gonna go.
Thanks, Jess.
So thank you to our listeners and see you in our next episode. Goodbye.